So it looked last night like Texas Senator Ted Cruz dozed off a number of times during President Biden's address, which might explain why he told Sean Hannity, quote, that the speech was boring but radical.
Well, look, I think the speech tonight, you could sum up in 3 words: boring but radical. The speech by design was calm and dulcet tones. I challenge you to remember a single line from the speech. I mean, it was monotone. The chamber was nearly empty. And that really has characterized the first 100 days of Joe Biden.
Democratic strategist and council member at large of Montgomery County, Maryland, Will Jawando, and White House reporter at Real Clear Politics, Philip Wegman, join us now to discuss. Thanks for joining us today, gentlemen.
Great to see you guys.
Good morning.
Good to see you.
All right. Well, Philip, I'll start with you. How do you think the speech landed? We've seen some early results indicating the audience, which was overwhelmingly Democratic, liked it. It landed well with them. What do you think this would do, let's say, to an independent voter? People that might not be partisan Democrats, but we're just curious to see how Joe Biden would describe the first 100 days of his administration and what he plans to do with the rest of his term.
I think Ted Cruz hopes that they walk away from the speech the same way that he did, sort of in a bit of a daze. And look, maybe Ted Cruz wasn't actually asleep. I think that he was doing that thing when you're a little kid, when you pretend to doze off because your parents are coming in to check on you, but you're not actually asleep.
Oh, really? You think this was a stunt?
That sounds like a you thing, Philip.
That sounds right. That's interesting. Anyway, go ahead, Phil.
I think that viral moment underscores his argument pretty well, which is, yes, this was boring but radical. And in terms of spending, if you actually look at all of the spending that President Biden is proposing, he's not exactly wrong. The U.S. government has already spent $1.9 trillion for COVID relief. Biden wants to spend another $2.3 trillion on his infrastructure package, $1.8 trillion on his education bill. And you add all of those numbers up, that's about $6 trillion, which is a third of the size of the U.S. economy, much greater than the normal $4 trillion we spend in a average non-pandemic year. So maybe you think that spending is fine. Maybe you like it. Maybe you think that inflation is just, some conservative scaremongering tactic. But the truth is, if you expand government that quickly, if you spend that big that quickly, it is pretty radical. It is a drastic departure even from the last 2 presidents. And I think that is what Republicans are trying to do here. They're trying to say, whoa, Biden might be boring. He might not be the most exciting orator, but his policy is actually very big. You should be worried. And they're banking on the fact that, maybe independents are also worried about that.
So look, Will, I dissent from the idea that anything Biden is offering here is radical. In fact, if you go through the speech, what I was saying is it was hard to object to anything that he said. It's like, let's have more American jobs. Let's fight cancer. Let's raise wages for people. Really, really basic and broadly majoritarian stuff. I know the right wants to say just look at the price tag. Because if you break down each of those individual pieces, it's like, okay, are you for paid leave? Yeah, of course people are for paid leave. Are you for universal pre-K? Yes, of course. Are you for a free community college? Yes, of course. Are you for infrastructure? Even Republicans are for infrastructure. So for me, when I look at that messaging from Ted Cruz, and also I watched a little bit of Sean Hannity's commentary where he went in on the he looks old and he walks like an old man, which also I think people don't care about whatsoever. They've really had a hard time going after Joe Biden. They've been on this Joe Biden is a secret radical and Bernie Sanders is pulling the strings and AOC is really running the government thing for months and months now, even before he was elected. And yet, at this point, voters see him as more moderate than either Donald Trump or Barack Obama at this time during their presidency. So clearly, even though they may think that he's radical and that the price tag is too big, the American public is not really buying that argument at this point.
No, I think you're exactly right. And one of the great strengths of Joe Biden is that it's almost impossible to look at him in the way he talks, in his kind of folksy, he had that great line, what are deer wearing Kevlar vests, which I'm certain was not on the script. Vivid
imagery.
It's impossible to look at him and hear what he's saying and say, this is some crazy radical guy who doesn't have my best interest in heart. I think it's one of his most endearing qualities. And you did see, this is a dramatic departure from the policies of the last 20 years. I agree with you that it's not radical. Those are all things that Americans should have, with 10 million plus Americans out of work, many others struggling, women, 40% of black businesses gone, women out of the workforce at dramatic numbers, people trying to just scrape by. I think when you hear those things, you're like, is this really possible? And it's coming from a trusted messenger, someone who's been in Washington. I think that actually works for Joe Biden. And when Americans believe what he's saying, this was the anti-Bill Clinton, we're going to have small government. It was a Democrat standing up and saying, this is what we stand for. This is what people need. They're struggling. We're at an unprecedented time, and we have to pay for it. And people have to pay their fair share. It was an honest telling. You don't have to like it, but I just appreciated that he said, this is what we're going to do. This is why we need to do it. And, I hope we can get on board. And I'm still willing to work with you. And I think all that benefits. That's why he's at 58, 60%, because he comes across as genuine, because I think he believes what he's saying.
Philip, should deer be wearing Kevlar vests?
That's the question we're really all left with.
No, here's a serious question. So a lot of people immediately picked up on Biden's comments or lack of substantive comments on his border policy or his immigration policy more broadly. He spent a lot of time talking about other things. Do you think that reflects his administration's difficulty addressing this issue? And then maybe also, just to piggyback on that question, do you think it also reflects that their priorities are on that issue out of whack with what the public wants to see? Is there a broader public appetite for the Biden administration to deal with this better?
Well, it's no surprise that Joe Biden didn't mention the crisis on the border last night. He talked about border security, and the need for that requires Republicans to pass immigration reform, something that Washington has been trying to do for 3 decades and has failed dismally at. There wasn't anything in there about stemming the massive influx of migrants coming across the border right now. And that's no surprise, because that's not a popular issue among the public right now. Polling shows that a lot of people are unhappy with that situation. Also, the public is wary of increased spending. And I think that that's why you see this argument over taxation and other things. Biden clearly was trying to lay out his agenda. And I think that in terms of what Biden was trying to do last night, it was a rejection of Bill Clinton's sort of argument that the era of big government was over. Instead, you have Biden leaning into that. And he is saying, we dealt with the crisis, which is the pandemic, because I did such a good job dealing with the crisis. Entrust me to embrace all of these other bigger government programs. And I think that that's his message. We'll see if in 2022 the public still trusts him and he retains either house of Congress.
Well, my issue is kind of the polar opposite, which is I worry that Biden's not going to do what it takes to actually enact this agenda. And so that we may be at sort of the apex where he did a good job with the vaccines. He got the checks into people's accounts, even though they were means tested ultimately, so that fewer people actually got checks under Biden than under Trump. I don't know why they did that. But anyway, did a good job with those pieces. Shots in the arms, checks in the bank account. But now, they're messing around trying to get Republicans on board with infrastructure. I don't really see a plan in place to get the social welfare spending piece through. We're 100 days in. Do you think that they actually, are in position to do what it takes to actually enact this agenda? To me, that's the question, because if you have people feeling like their lives have tangibly improved, they're going to care a lot less about what the price tag on the spending is come the midterms. But as long as the filibuster remains in place, a lot of this agenda is never going to be enacted.
Well, I think it's a fair concern, and one I thought coming into today you would have. And look, the good news, as I've mentioned before, is our great friend, my former colleague in the Senate parliamentarian. We can move this jobs plan with 50 senators and Vice President Harris. And I think that's got to be top of agenda. You can make the overtures and reach out to Republicans. Look, Donald Trump talked about an infrastructure bill for 4 years. They had both houses of Congress. We got nothing. So if they want to come to the table on infrastructure, they have an opportunity, Republicans. But I think most Americans look at their roads, they look at traffic. They look at the lack of jobs for people, particularly for working class, blue collar folks. And this sounds like a good opportunity. And so I think I agree with you. We need to push it. You need to deliver on it. And I think with the 51 votes, eliminating the filibuster or not, you can get that across the line. And then we'll see 2022 will come. And then we'll see how Americans react. And then we can see if we can get higher majorities in both houses. I think it's going to be tough to do two things, just frankly. But I think that's the one to go at. That would be what I'm recommending. And I think that's the strategy that you'll see, too.
Yeah. And worth noting, I mean, Republicans have a lot of structural advantages that are only set to expand with redistricting. All right, guys, stick with us. More Team Rising for you after this.